Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Arena, and welcome back after the holidays as well. I hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas. We are back officially with a subscriber deck series, so after the previous video that I did on this, we got a lot of feedback. A lot of it was positive, and as I mentioned, if you support the channel or support a video in a meaningful way, then I will come back and do more of them. So, subscriber deck series had a lot of feedback, and I really appreciate that from you guys, so cheers very much, and yeah, let's get into it, shall we? So today's episode is actually a deck that has been suggested to me a few times as a possible deck to build, but I've never really gotten around to it. But Emerald Tier has sent me in a wonderful blue-black Etrata list. So Etrata is a build-around creature. Essentially, the deck is focused on her. She's 2, a blue and a black for a 3/5 legendary creature, and it says, Etrata the Silencer can't be blocked. When Etrata deals combat damage to a player, exile target creature that player controls and put a hit counter on that card. That player loses the game if they own 3 or more exiled cards with hit counters on them. Etrata's owner shuffles Etrata into their library. So, the downside of this card is that the creature itself gets shuffled into the library, so you can't really effectively win over 3 turns, or at least not in this particular build anyway. So, it should be stated as well that they mentioned that they don't actually have any Helm of the Hosts, so that is a nice little combo with Etrata. It can make a copy of her, and then the copy can swing in an attack, and that's a good way to get the 3 turns in a row Etrata kill. So, something to keep in mind, but they did mention that they didn't have any Helm of the Hosts, so we'll just leave that one over in the corner as probably an improvement in this deck, but not one that's in this list, but it's a known improvement anyway. So, the idea is that Etrata is going to constantly get shuffled back into the deck as she is exiling creatures. We only need to exile 3 creatures to win the game. The downside of this deck, of course, is that if your opponent isn't playing a creature-focused deck, then you are going to have a bad time, because Etrata is going to have nothing to exile. So, as the alternative win condition, we actually have Thief of Sanity as well. A 1 blue and a black 2/2 flying spectre. Whenever Thief of Sanity deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of that player's library, exile one of them face down, and put the rest into their graveyard. You may look at and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. Absolutely love this card. If you can keep it safe, it is really good. So essentially, Thief of Sanity is a mill win condition. It can mill through Nexus of Fates as well, because that card that you look at and take can be Nexus of Fate, which means it never gets shuffled into the graveyard, that kind of thing. But it's also a really good card for mirror breaking as well. So if you think about going up against a control matchup or something like that, control decks are pretty much built to beat themselves as much as they are built to beat anything else, since they are filled with removal for planeswalkers and counter spells and things like that. And that's exactly what we want if we're going up against control. So Thief of Sanity, really solid card to go up against control with that kind of stuff. So, if we are going to try and defend Etrata and Thief of Sanity, we have things like Sinister Sabotage, which is a 3-mana counter spell. It essentially allows us to look at the top card of our deck. If we do not like it, then we get to put it into our graveyard, which is essentially thinning, and that actually allows us to find our very important pieces like our Etrata and Thief of Sanity as well, so really powerful card right there. To also thin our deck, we have 2 copies of Anticipate, 1 and a blue, to look at 3 cards of our library. You get to put 1 into your hand, the rest onto the bottom of your library in any order. So we want to be hunting for our Etratas, or maybe our Thief of Sanities, depending on the matchup. And also, in terms of card draw, we have Chemist's Insight. Most of you know what this one does. 4-mana card draw for 2 cards. And it also has Jumpstart, which means we discard a card to allow us to cast it from our graveyard again. So we get to go 4 cards deep, but we do have to discard a card in the process. So pretty cool stuff there. Also, on top of defending ourselves, there's an interesting one, Devious Cover-Up. So this is a counter spell similar to Sinister Sabotage, but with a mix of like Syncopate in there as well. It's a 4-mana counter spell, counters anything, and if that spell is countered, it gets exiled, which is why it's kind of similar to Syncopate in that sense. And then it also has this optional ability at the bottom here, which is interesting. I'm not sure if it's necessarily good for an Etrata list, because shuffling 4 cards into your library is not necessarily what you want to be doing, since you want to be thinning your deck, since of course Etrata is going to get shuffled back into your deck, so the less cards that you have in your library, the more likely you are to redraw Etrata again. However, being able to loop devious cover-ups together does allow you to actually put cards that are useful in the matchup, like Sinister Sabotage, or maybe even just the Anticipates, which can maybe allow you to go a little bit deeper. I'm not entirely sure on this particular inclusion just yet, but we'll go into some playtesting and we'll find out whether or not it actually works in the end. I do like the idea, though, of being able to devious cover up and stick 3 counter spells back into my deck. So, you know, that is kind of interesting in that sense. We also have Essence Scatter as well to help against early game creatures, because as much as we do want to actually exile creatures with Etrata, having the early game aggression from something like Mono Red, it's not something that you want to let happen. So we have 2 copies of Essence Scatter here as a 1 and a blue to counter a creature spell. So any early game aggression, anything that we can't target with Etrata, maybe if it's a Vine Mare, we can Essence Scatter that away and hopefully deal with it. Again, I'm not entirely sure if Essence Scatter is the answer we're looking for. It could be just some sort of creature removal instead. Since we are in black, we have our dead weights to give -2/-2, which might want to be Moment of Cravings. It's 1 mana extra, but it gives you life gain, so something to keep in mind. We also have Cast Downs as well to take care of non-legendary creatures. Again, dead weights might want to just be a cast down, because this is probably one of the better removal spells in the format, so something to keep in mind. And then 3 copies of Vraska's Contempt over at the top here. Exiles a creature or a Planeswalker. Planeswalker, I think, is the main reason why you would run this card, since it's not something that we can actually interact with in terms of removing, other than Vraska's Contempt. And I guess being able to loop it with Devious Cover-Up and stick Contempts back into your deck might actually be a good argument for this one. I'm actually slightly optimistic about Devious Cover-Up. As weird as it seems as a card to include in a deck that wants to be thinning, you actually might want to be putting answers back into your deck. So, as I said, we're going to test this out. We're going to see how well it performs, and hopefully we like it so I don't have to remove it. Finally, we have 2 copies of Ritual of Soot as well. Destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less. So this does not kill Etrata, however it does kill Thief of Sanity. So that's something to keep in mind, though this is actually in here for, I'm assuming, the aggro matchups, the mono reds, the Boros as well. The ones where all of the creatures are converted mana cost 3 or less for the most part. We can take them out, and then our removal suite from that point forward can take care of the rest of the stuff. We also have Lazav, the Multifarious, as well. A 2-mana 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, you get to Surveil 1. Yet again, we use this to thin our deck so that Etrata's odds of being drawn ever increase. And Lazav has a secondary ability here. You can pay X, and Lazav becomes a copy of a target creature in your graveyard with converted mana cost X, except for its name is Lazav and it's legendary, in addition to its other types, and has this ability. So, Lazav can actually copy either the Thief of Sanity or the Etrata if they've been removed from our graveyard, removed from the battlefield, sorry, and they're sat in our graveyard. So, Lazav is effectively copies 5 of 6 of both Thief of Sanity and Etrata, so it's a really good way to keep your consistency up. I like this inclusion quite a lot. There are a few situations, though, when Lazav is a dead card. As an example is when these are not in the graveyard, but I think this is kind of the panic button kind of situation where, you know, they have been removing your Etratas and your Thief of Sanities, then at least you have a Lazav at the back there, so who knows. The final inclusions are 2 copies of Disperse, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This is 2 mana instant. Automatically, I know that this card is going to get changed because there is a strictly better version of this card currently in Standard. So this is actually probably going to be blink of an eye, and we will be changing that because we'll be testing this out. Because during gameplay, I can showcase why you want to be putting strictly better cards in your deck as an example. So it's a learning lesson, should we say. And then finally, we've got 2 copies of Thought Erasure, blue and a black. Most people know this card. It is horrible to play against. Target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, and that player discards that card, and then you Surveil, thinning our deck as well. So this allows us to get rid of any potential removal for our Thief of Sanities or Etratas, maybe even the counter spells if we're going up against control, that kind of thing. But anyway, that's the deck. The final changes to the deck as well. We have 2 copies of Dimir Guildgate. These do definitely want to be changed. They want to be the watery graves, so we'll get to that later on down the line. We've got 8 swamps and 9 islands and 4 copies of Drowned Catacombs. So it's a reasonable mana base, though of course Dimir Guildgates, there are strictly better lands that you want to be playing. So yep, that's going to be the list anyway. We're going to take it through a few games, see how it performs as it is, and then we'll make some few changes. Some that we know that we need to change, and some that maybe we're not so sure about, and maybe they end up being a little bit underwhelming. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the games, and I'll see you there. Okay, we're in, and right off the bat we have no blue mana. We do have an active deadweight, but that is about it. I mean, if we got an island we could play Thief of Sanity, we can't really protect it. This one's an awkward one. So I think I'm going to mulligan this one just because I don't really know what the top 10 cards in my library are going to be, so they might not even be a blue land, and in which case we just automatically lose. So let's mulligan. And this one's okay. We have some removal. We don't have our Etrata, but we also don't have the mana to cast her, so I'm not too sad about not having her in hand. And we also have a way of finding her. As I mentioned in the deck tech, Lazav right now is a bit of a dead card though, so let's have a look. Let's keep it, and yeah, definitely gonna put Lazav to the bottom there. We cannot do anything with him, so we're basically gonna be hunting for land drops and either our Thief of Sanity or our Etrata. Completely depends on the matchup, of course. Blue-black. It's going to be an interesting one. Alright, well, let's play our island. We can anticipate, or we can cast down here. Likelihood is, though, if my opponent is playing strict blue-black, we're actually going to get Thought Erasured, because they usually have 4 copies of that card in most of the blue-black decks, so something to keep in mind. Leading off with a Search for Escanter. It's also pretty bad for us. Not much we can do about that one. Now then, we have our 4th land, which is something that we need, but there's also a Vraska's Contempt, so we have to identify what that Contempt is going to hit. In blue-black, there aren't really many Planeswalkers, but creature-wise, we have Doom Whisperers and Thief of Sanities. Now, I think because I have this cast down, I should be okay. Most of their creatures are not legendary, so it's between the Anticipate and the Swamp here. And I think I actually might take the Anticipate, because I actually need double blue as far as lands are concerned, and right off the bat we actually have a Thief of Sanity here. I could play this down and it would probably just straight up die, but that would be my opponent's turn. If it lives though, we could be in a really good spot. The type of cards that my opponent has in their deck are really good at beating them. I guess the worst case scenario, this is never going to get exiled, because Vraska's Contempt is their top end exile spell. So if it does die, it actually enables Lazav. It's a tough one. If I had another blue, then I would actually pass the turn and just hold up and sabotage. But because I don't, I have to be a little bit more proactive, so I have to take a risky play here. The alternative is, of course, that I anticipate, but my opponent could just run out a discard spell, either taking the Anticipate right off the bat, which is maybe what I would take, or I have to anticipate in response and they take whatever good card that it actually ends up yielding. Straight up with a Golden Demise, wow, okay. And then we have ourselves a Dimir Guildgate, and this is a brilliant example of why this should be a watery grave, because this is guaranteed as a tap land. Now, if this was a watery grave, I would actually have Lazav plus a Surveil plus an untapped Anticipate, so I would be able to do more with my turn. I could also shock this in and hold up in a counter spell, so it's a really good example of why Dimir Guildgates are not a great idea. My opponent's getting very upset with me right now, which is whatever. I'm just going to play Lazav down. See what we can do. I do not need any more lands. Not for now, anyway. Let's get that off the top. And then let's pass the turn. Okay. Disinformation campaign from our opponent. I think I will discard the Anticipate. I've got some good cards right now, so I'm not too fussed about... Ooh, Thief of Sanity. We have a Thief of Sanity in the graveyard for Lazav to trigger. I think I actually just want to start hitting for 1 and use this Sabotage. I'm kind of wishing I had that other land, actually, that I dumped. That was maybe a mistake to surveil that into the graveyard. Ooh, a mission briefing. Interesting. Yeah, well, that's a Thought Erasure, so we are forced to counter this. And there's a land. I'll take a land. That allows us to play Lazav as a Thief of Sanity and hold up and cast down for whatever that's worth. We are about to hit 5 mana for our opponent. So that does mean potential for a Doom Whisperer, Mr. Tickler. Drowned Catacomb from our opponent. Okay. So, let's turn Lazav into a Thief of Sanity, naming 3. And let's see what our opponent has in their deck. Eldest Reborn is kind of nice. I also don't mind Discovery Dispersal. I think we'll take Eldest Reborn, though. It's an answer to Doom Whisperer. If he does end up using Disinformation Campaign, then I do actually have the cast down effect, basically. So my opponent now can flip his Search for Azcanta. It's one of the downsides of getting in with a Thief of Sanity, is that we will enable things like Azcanta. Going Dream Eater, okay. So he's going to be bouncing Lazav. I'm actually just going to kill this in response. So we know Lazav's just getting bounced anyway. There is an argument, of course, to leave the cast down until the Surveil finishes, because now they know that they don't get to keep their Dream Eater, and that might affect this Surveil. My opponent Yorgoed me, so I'm trying to play a little bit more hasty than I maybe was. It's leading to some potential mistakes. They actually just left them all on top. Interesting. Alright. So he gets to bounce Lazav. Ooh, Essence Scatter. That's really nice. Okay, so we're going to play Lazav. We get that Surveil again, which is why I'm playing it over Thief of Sanity. And there's Etrata. I actually don't know if Etrata is the card for this matchup. There aren't many creatures in Dimir that I have to worry about. And putting in the graveyard actually just makes it a target for Lazav. So, we could turn Lazav into a Thief of Sanity right now with our mana. But, if I don't do it now, I'm not investing... Okay, I think I'm going to dump the Essence Scatter here. Because I think Thief of Sanity is our way to victory. That and probably this Eldest Reborn at this point. Thief of Sanity of his own, okay. Alright, and then I can end step my Lazav, copying Thief of Sanity. And then, thanks to my opponent, I can actually play their Eldest Reborn, forcing their Thief of Sanity out of here. They're going to need to bounce this, otherwise we are going to get access to another Thief of Sanity. And now we get to swing in, potentially take some really wonderful stuff, like another Thief. Board wipe and a land for my opponent. I don't really need the board wipe. The Ritual of Soot barely hits anything in their deck. Thief of Sanity, I think, is the only exception to that. Eldest Reborn, okay. The counter Reborn. Alright. So, we lose Lazav. Oh, we get some more Thief of Sanities. Okay. They take down a cast down. So we're going to play Thief of Sanity here. It's important to play the ones from hand, because they are going to be making us discard cards. So this one's always going to be safe. We're going to get rid of the Thief of Sanity here, I think. See if they have an answer to this one. They have a cast down. Okay. That's fair enough. Well, we know we're getting one back, because we have our Eldest Reborn here. Now, I do not want to take one from my opponent's yard if I have the option. The reason for that is because if they have a bounce effect like Dream Eater, then they actually get their Thief of Sanity back to hand. So I'm going to take my own Thief of Sanity here. We even have a dead weight as well to drop on theirs. It depends on whether or not they end up going for that. We'll have to find out. It could also be a mistake to do what I'm doing right now. But they've countered it. Okay, so there's no real issue there. The mistake could be that they actually Dream Eater back their own Thief of Sanity. But they ended up countering it. So that's pretty good. So we have the answer to Dream Eater and Thief of Sanity currently in hand. Then again, it's going to depend on which one they pick here, because we know that they're probably going to go with the Disinformation campaign. Yeah, so bouncing my Thief. So I want to drop the dead weight when they make me discard. Hopefully I get the option to actually play this Vraska's Contempt. Oh, this is a grindy matchup and a half. And there he goes. We could get Thought Erasured here. It's actually just going to be the Disinformation campaign though. So let's drop the deadweight. And then hopefully they don't add anything more to the board here. It's going to be a land into, hopefully... Ah, God. That's probably game right there. Yeah, takes the Vraska's Contempt so we can no longer answer the Dream Eater. Bounces the campaign. And forces us to discard the Thief of Sanity. Yeah, it turns out that my opponent's just a little bit more interactive than we are. We have no way of protecting our creatures either, so that's probably going to do it. I have a hard time seeing how we're going to get out of this one. Blood Operative to start exiling our creatures. That's not going to be too terrible, because I think Lazav is still at the bottom of our deck. Yeah, so any graveyard interaction that we have is pointless. He gets rid of the Vraska's Contempt, which is interesting. Suggesting that my opponent thinks that I have a way of... Ooh. Okay, if this can live, then maybe we're back into this, but I expect this to just get countered. Sinister Sabotage. Yeah. Bounces the campaign. And I think this is basically where my opponent has locked us out. They have a hell of a lot of damage on board. 3-turn clock as it currently stands. They have card draw and forced discard as well. So we can't respond to anything at instant speed. Doom Whisperer coming down, and I think that's where we're going to call it game on this one. So let's go for another game. Okay, we're in, and we actually have decent mana. We have turn 1 Deadweight if we need it, followed by turn 2 Thought Erasure to protect whatever might kill our Thief of Sanity on turn 3. Everything's castable. I like this hand. Disperse as a panic button. So let's play our Swamp and pass the turn. See what we're up against. It's a red deck. Okay, so this Deadweight is actually going to be quite effective. So in terms of the win condition that we're looking for here, we either have the Thief of Sanity or we have the Etrata. This one is likely to be an Etrata win, mostly because our opponent can kill Thief of Sanity quite effectively, but Etrata is a 3/5, which means that it needs a 2-for-1 on our opponent, so they're going to have to use 2 cards to kill an Etrata, which is really good for us. Now, I think I want to actually go for the Thought Erasure over killing the Lava Runner. Lava Runner only represents 1 damage here, whereas, yeah, there could be a Wizard's Lightning that represents a hell of a lot more. And we could even use the Deadweight on Pyromancer here, so I think I'm going to take the Wizard's Lightning. Take 3 damage out of their hand. I'm going to get rid of this Dimir Guildgate. Do not want to tap land. Yeah, again, another situation where I do have a land that I'm not happy to see. Oh, my opponent top decks a Steamkin, which is much more powerful than the Pyromancer here, so that is definitely going to bite the dust. It's actually one situation where I actually like Deadweight here. We have 3 mana, and that's actually opened up Cast Down as a castable option here. So if my opponent goes Chain Whirler, I probably... Oh, even Steamkin, in fact. I probably want to be casting that down. So let's get rid of that. My opponent is yet to play their second spell, so Lava Runner's still going to be a 1-2. And as it stands, their hand is currently clear of any way to deal with Thief of Sanity. Oh, we have the Essence Scatter though, and we know that it's going to go perfectly. If my opponent plays as his mana efficient, if he's going to play mana efficiently, then he actually will play Chain Whirler, which is a great Essence Scatter target. So I think I'm going to take a turn off of playing Thief of Sanity as much as I really want to play it down. I think I actually want to play it a little safe. They're actually going to go with Pyromancer. Interesting. That is very interesting. So this must be a Shock or a Wizard's Lightning or something like that. I'm going to counter this though. This represents a hell of a lot of damage not happening anymore. It was 2 damage off of the Pyromancer's Enter the Battlefield effect, and also the amount of damage that it would have actually ended up outputting as it being a 2-1. I'm going to play Thief of Sanity here. Hopefully we don't see any removal off the top for our opponent. I mean, they could go Chain Whirler, Crack Firebrand here. He's choosing to swing in though. So they're going to need a little bit more than a Chain Whirler. So I'm going to not block here. I'm going to take 2 in hopes that the burn spells that they have in hand actually get pointed at Thief of Sanity, which is not getting pointed at my face. If they'd have gone with the Firebrand to crack on Thief, then I may have blocked because I knew that Chain Whirler was coming down anyway. So they've just used a Shock on my Thief of Sanity. Should be noted that this is actually a pretty terrible matchup for us. We only have 1 blue mana. I'm going to have to Thief of Sanity here, but they can go Firebrand, Chain Whirler, swing for 4. And that looks like it's going to be the case. Taking 5. Well, they can't kill Thief of Sanity, so I'm going to take this 5. I'm going to hope whatever we get off the top of our opponent's deck, plus our own, is enough to stop all of this. And that is a terrible draw for us. Okay, well, I have to swing. But as far as I'm aware, there's nothing my opponent could have in their deck that really saves us here. Yeah, there's a Lightning Strike on the Chain Whirler here. We can bounce the Lava Runner with Disperse. In theory, we're still alive. Nope, and that's another Lava Runner, and that'll do. Yeah, taking 5. It's a pretty bad matchup for us, though, I won't lie. But this is where maybe the Moment of Cravings come in. I really do like Moment of Craving, I don't know if you've noticed, but the life gain is super important in a matchup like this. If you imagine that Deadweight, or this Cast Down, being a Moment of Craving in that situation, we might have actually just lived through all of that with the amount of life gain that we got. But yeah, currently 0-2, so I suppose we want to be looking at some changes to this deck anyway, so let's get into the deck builder. Let's have a look-see. Okay, so we've had a few games with this one. We've seen quite a fair bit of the deck, but we haven't really seen certain pieces of it, so I'm still not in a position to judge Devious Cover-Up as a counterspell here. But we do know that we really struggle against the aggro matchups. One thing that I want to change right off the bat, though, is these Dimir Guild Gates. I think we all know that these Dimir Guild Gates are better off as Watery Graves. So, your Guild Gates are always tapped. However, the Watery Graves, they enter the battlefield tapped if you want them to. However, you can pay 2 life to make them come into play untapped. So, in the late game situations where you really need that mana, if you were to hit a Dimir Guild Gate, that would just kill you, straight off the bat. At least with Watery Grave, you have that opportunity to pay the 2 life to allow yourself to untap. So, we're actually just going to cut down on some swamps. It also helps our consistency as well. We had a lot of situations in our games where we had all swamps and just 1 island or 1 blue source, and that's simply not acceptable, especially when our turn 3 play requires 2 blue, and we have a lot of turn 2 plays that actually require a blue and a black. So this is quite the mana intensive deck, so it should be very important that we actually put in some mana-intensive helping cards. So all of the dual lands that we could possibly get in that do not hurt us here should be in this list. So I am aware, though, that maybe our submitter, our Emerald tier, was probably on a budget, and they probably knew about Watery Grave being a strict upgrade, but it's a really good idea if you are starting as a free-to-play player to get these dual lands in your deck as soon as possible. If you are focusing on one colour, then especially that is important, because the amount of times that a tap land has actually killed me in a game where that could have been my gold for the day. You know, if I'm going for my 4 wins, I want to be winning as consistently as possible. So the amount of times that a tap land has actually killed me, I should really be trying to hedge against that. And the best thing that you can do to do that is change out your tap lands for the dual lands that you see here. So you have your Drowned Catacombs and your Watery Graves, and there's plenty more in every other colour as well. You want your Dragon Skull Summits and things like that. These ones are going to probably see some more play in the next set as well. So depending on which guild that you kind of like, if you know that you're into an Orzhov kind of strategy, then you want to get yourself your Isolated Chapels, because all of the other dual lands are going to be coming soon. So it's really important that you get these dual lands nice and early, because they go into every single deck as well. They're a really good investment. They are boring, I understand that, but it's something that you really, really should invest in as a free-to-play player. Anyway, moving on. Let's go back to this list. So, if we look at this, I kind of really like Thought Erasure. If you remember the game that we actually played this one down, it allowed our Thief of Sanity to come down on turn 3 safely enough. So I actually like the idea of adding another Thought Erasure in here. It's also really good against, let me just type it in. It's also really good against the control matchups as well, which I think this deck could use a little bit of help with. We're going to get at least one extra copy of Thought Erasure in here. I'm not entirely sure if we want all 4 copies. It is nice to have all 4 though, because it pretty much guarantees that you have them in your opening hand. The Disperses are a weird one. So Disperse is certainly not the card that wants to be going in this deck. We actually do have a strict upgrade in Blink of an Eye. So Blink of an Eye is 1 and a blue. It says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, which is return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So it does the same thing for the same mana at the same speed. However, this actually also has an additional ability, the Kicker, 1 and blue, and it says if this spell was kicked, you get to draw a card. So suddenly, if you're looking at Disperse, you actually see that this Kicker spell allows you to get some extra card draw out of it, and a card that replaces itself is certainly better than a card that does not, especially if they do exactly the same thing. So if you are to keep these Disperses in, then you probably want Blink of an Eye over Disperse. It's also a common as well, so it's easy to come by. Yeah, again, it's probably a budget thing for the deck as it stands, but you definitely want to be putting your Blink of an Eyes in. It's a great common to pick up if you do want Disperse effects. However, I'm not sure if this deck actually wants Disperse effects. We want to be, if we're thinking about protecting our own creatures, then we don't really want to be removing them from the battlefield so that we have to recast them. That is a huge, huge tempo loss for us. So that's an extra 3 or 4 mana that we're having to spend on our next turn, in addition to the 2 mana that we're spending on the current turn protecting our creatures. So I'm not sure that Disperse is necessarily the card for us. What we could do instead is we could actually run a card called Dive Down. Dive Down is a 1 blue mana, so it's already 1 cheaper, and it allows us to give target creature +0/+3, so it protects against burn spells. In the case of Thief of Sanity, that's pretty important. It also gives us hexproof as well. So hexproof allows it to not get targeted, so if your opponent does point a shock at Thief of Sanity, then they're actually going to fizzle that spell and it's never going to hit them. I actually like Dive Downs much better than Disperses in this particular deck. You do not want your Etratas being Vraska's Contempted or something like that, so a Dive Down's really nice for that kind of thing. Now, as for the deadweights, I'm not entirely sure where I fall upon these ones, but I'm leaning towards not liking them more than I am anything else, to be honest. I think you probably want these to be something like Moment of Craving. In that red matchup, we really needed life gain. This deck does not contain any of it, so that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to take down those, and I'm actually going to put in some Moment of Cravings. It does the same thing, but for 1 mana extra, 1 colourless mana as well, so it's not as exactly harder to cast. It kills in the exact same way, but it also gives us 2 life, which is really good for surviving the burn matchup. So if you think about how that burn matchup is going to go, it's essentially going to be your opponent spams the board with all of their creatures and burn spells. They're going to be empty-handed. During that period of time, you're going to be hopefully killing them with Moment of Craving, which kills essentially every single creature in their deck, minus Rekindling Phoenix and Chain Whirler, which we have cast downs for, and Vraska's Contempts. So it's going to be killing all of those. It gets through indestructible creatures as well, same as Deadweight does, to be fair. So things like Andanto Vanguard is going to die to a Moment of Craving, where a cast down, a Ritual of Soot, wouldn't actually allow that to happen. So it is kind of an important effect to have as well. But the life gain is super important as well. You basically, if your opponent's playing a creature and you Moment of Craving it, they've given you life by playing a card for you. So it's something to keep in mind there. What other cuts could we make here? It's an interesting one, because I'm not entirely sure where I fall on this one. I don't know if I actually love 2 copies of Lazav. We have situations where Lazav is just a completely dead card. I'm not sure if 8 copies of a creature is enough to justify 2 copies. We could try 1 copy and have it like that, because it is nice to actually copy Etrata and Thief of Sanity from the graveyard. I do like that, but drawing into 2 Lazavs, or drawing into a Lazav really early on in the game, is really not so fantastic for us. So I think I actually want to cut one of these copies and leave it like that. For now, I think I want to leave this as it is. I'm still not decided on the Devious cover-ups. I know Ritual of Soots are pretty good as far as removal's concerned, for the red matchups and anything else like that. Red-white also gets hit quite a fair bit with Ritual of Soot, but we never know. We might actually want this to be 1 copy and maybe an extra copy of Vraska's Contempt, or maybe a cast down or a Moment of Craving. Something to keep in mind, but I'm going to try this as it is. It's not many changes to be needed, but most decks don't really require big drastic changes, and I don't think when you're testing a deck you should really make big drastic changes either. It's something that most people, I think, fall into the trap of when they're building a deck. They play 1 game and they say, oh my god, this was crap, let's cut it and let's see how it goes. And then, oh, suddenly it was really good because the next game went really well. Well, you've only got 1 game that you've tested. What about the other 50 games you should have played before you made your changes or anything like that? The more games that you play with a deck, this is my basic point, the more games that you play with your deck, the more knowledge you have of how it plays against certain matchups. So you're actually more informed when you make all of these cuts and additions. Now, I've been deck building for quite a long time. It's basically why I play Magic the Gathering. So I am doing this a little bit hasty in the aid of making this video. You know, I've only played 2 matches for you, but I have played this deck in the past on my own as well. So I actually have a fair bit of playtesting behind me to know what I am cutting and what I'm adding here, so something to keep in mind. But in reality, if you are going to be testing your deck and improving it, you should play at least 4 or 5 games before you make any kind of tweaks. And if you do make a tweak, don't make drastic changes all in one go. Don't cut Thief of Sanity anticipates, Essence Scatters, adding in negates and things like that. You don't want to be doing that. Just make minor little tweaks of things that you've noticed are bad, and make sure that you know that they're bad for a good reason. If it was just that you didn't draw the card and you felt bad that you didn't draw the card, it's not reason to cut it. But if it was terrible in several different matchups, then you definitely want to cut it to add maybe a card that fits that slot a little bit more. Identify what is bad with your deck when you actually add it. So in this case, we're adding in dive downs because I know that this game cannot be won if Thief of Sanity and Etrata get killed consistently. So we're adding in 2 copies of dive down to protect our win conditions as a very cheap way of doing it as well. So it allows us to have like our 2 mana spells, which are quite numerous, and hold up and a dive down at the same time. Only 2 copies though, because we do have sinister sabotages and devious cover-ups to protect all the same. So, something to keep in mind. Without further ado, let's go and play some brand new games with this list. Okay, we're in. We're on the draw with 2 mana and an Anticipate, which could allow us to find the blue mana for the rest of this hand to be online. So I think I can take this, especially being on the draw. You've always got to imagine when you're on the draw that there is an extra card here that could be literally anything. So figuring out what's in your deck and the percentage chance that you might draw them, say the blue land that we need, which is quite likely. There are, I think, 8 islands in this deck, and all 8 of them are in our deck. So there's a pretty good chance that we actually draw the island we need for the Sinister Sabotage, which would mean that Anticipate wouldn't need to find it. So I can keep this hand knowing that this is likely to be a 3-lander, which allows me to do all of my stuff. Probably a 4-lander as well, because this Anticipate might get me my 4th land for Etrata here. Okay, so my opponent leads off with an Opt. So this could either be Mono Blue Tempo or Jeskai Control. It's usually the ones. And as I mentioned, the odds were ever in our favour that we were going to draw that island there, so... yeah, 8 out of 57 cards. Or 53, sorry. I'm talking about 57. 8 out of 53 is pretty good odds. Alright, so we're going to pass the turn. There's nothing we can really do here, but there's no reason why we should anticipate main phase. This represents an Essence Scatter as well as removal. And it looks like we're up against Drakes. So I'm going to need an answer to that Drake. Other than maybe Etrata. So we have Vraska's Contempt, but we also have the 4th land. That's a tough one. We already have our land drop for the turn, so I don't think I want to take the island. We also have Chemist's Insight, so I think I'm going to take Vraska's Contempt. It's a good thing to take care of Niv Mizzet and Ral, which are 2 really big threats that our opponent could have. And we also have the Cast Down now for the Enigma Drake. There's an argument to do this now, because sometimes they run dive downs. But I actually like the idea of holding up a Sabotage, because it allows me to check the top card of my library. I almost want to keep this Drake in play for Etrata as well, if we were to draw that 4th land. And this allows us to prevent more Drakes from entering the field, because we can only take care of 1 with Etrata before it gets shuffled back in. There's Quasi-Duplicate, which is really good value for us. We are going to cast that down in response. Nice. So the cost of 1 life, we actually managed to fizzle our opponent. Now then. We can play Watery Grave untapped to play Etrata, but our opponent will never play a creature from that point forward. That's not terrible. In terms of removal, they do run Lava Coils and Shocks in the same deck. This one seems like a Quasi-Duplicate Drake, which I think is an MTG Goldfish list. I actually don't remember the exact combination of cards in there. I think I'm just going to lead with Thief of Sanity. This allows me to bait out the Shock they might have or the Lava Coil, which makes Etrata a lot safer of a play the following turn. There's Crackling Drake. Okay. So I'm going to Contempt that, which allows me to get through and steal a card with Thief of Sanity. So the best draw that we can have is a land, since we need to make our land drops. And this might actually make a Shock or something like that playable off the top for our opponent. So get that out of the way. Effectively allowing us to draw a card with Thief of Sanity. We get an Opt. So I think the castable spell is probably a little bit more important than the Sabotage. That's a tough one, actually. We certainly can't take the land, because we actually cannot cast lands. You can only play lands, so it's a very important word in the Thief of Sanity text. So we could take the castable, which allows us to find our castables. Or we could take the Sabotage, which is playable later down the line. Counter spells are really good. We're not going to be able to counter the next thing they play, though, is what I'm thinking. So I think I'd rather just take the Opt, which allows me to use my Sabotages and also set up the top card of my deck, which might be something like a Dive Down to protect Etrata. Because that is the perfect curve right now. It's Etrata into an Opt. We've also, as well, dumped a few sabotages, so really good stuff there. Opponent explosions my Thief of Sanity. Awesome. Exactly what I wanted to see. I actually might take this land. And instead of going for Etrata, with our opponent having no creatures in board, I actually can hold open Chemist's Insight and Sabotage in the same turn. So I actually think I'm going to take the control position here. Other than Niv Mizzet, which we have a Contempt for, there's nothing my opponent can really play that punishes me for that line, so I might as well take my time with this. Then we get a Lazav. So Lazav is 2 mana, allows us to hold up a Sinister Sabotage and a Cast Down, as well as getting the Surveil here. I'm not going to fight over this, so if they do counter it, I'm going to let it go. Yep, do not care about that. Yep, okay. Because if I fight over that, that gets them to resolve whatever they want next turn, which I think is like a Drake plus a Quasi-Duplicate. That is a combination of cards I don't want to contend with. So, let's... Chemist's Insight. We're going to dump Cast Down, because it does not kill Niv Mizzet, so we have Vraska's Contempt here instead. I didn't really want to get rid of anything here, but, well, we basically just replaced our cards there with something much better. Alright, so this would allow us to Etrata with Sabotage open. It's a 3/5 beater, and it should be noted that she doesn't get shuffled into the deck if she doesn't exile a creature, so if my opponent just doesn't play anything, then we're okay. I think because I can't improve my hand any further, I am just going to go for the Etrata here. It's a tough one, because I could Thought Erasure out any kind of Essence Scatter effects from my opponent. I think I actually might. I'm not sure what the correct line is here, so we're going to go look at our opponent's hand. See what they're holding on to. They actually didn't have a way of dealing with Etrata other than blink of an eye. This one's a tough one. I could make them use blink of an eye, but it'll draw them a card and replace it anyway. I think I'm just going to take that. Dump the land. No, actually, I'm going to keep the land. Land means I can do more in my turn. I'm just going to play Etrata. They can't currently deal with it, so they need to draw into an answer for Etrata. We know that they can't really pressure us with us unless they get lucky off of a Charter Course. So not holding up my counter spells isn't insanely bad for us. So they actually got the Etrata bounced with a top-decked blink of an eye there. And let's see if they can follow it up with a creature. So now that they have unknown cards, they've even dumped the Quasi-Duplicate, which is effectively a free discard. Yeah, if they can follow that up with a creature now, then that's going to be a bit of an issue. They actually just straight up shocked in a Steam Vent, so we've got to ask ourselves what that could be. We know that they run the Sinister Sabotage, and that is the perfect mana to line that up. It could also be just red mana for a shock as well. So, knowing that it could be a Sabotage, I have to play this card under the assumption I might be fighting for it. I don't think I want to fight for that card. I would rather force them into my counter spells and take my time with this. While I've got these resources to spend, I'm going to spend them. So here's a Sabotage. So if we were correct about that shock land, he's going to Sabotage us here. And that means that we're probably going to... Yeah, so we were correct. I'm actually going to Sabotage here, because Niv Mizzet cannot be countered. So this Essence Scatter is dead against Niv, and this Vraska's Contempt is our only answer to it, so I don't want to use that on a Ral. So let's double counter. I hate to do it, but I think we're in a position where we have to. Our opponent's got 1 mana, so there's nothing they can really do here. Second Etrata. Yeah, let's take it. Our opponent is essentially out of gas. We can play our Etrata. We only have Essence Scatters to play in real time. You know, as a reactionary spell. So we can hold up in 2 here. We also have the Vraska's content for Niv Mizzet, so I think we're in a really solid position where our opponent, I don't think they can get out of this one. But we'll have to see. We have used some sabotages, so it's freeing up a little bit of space for our opponent. They're allowed to do all of this card draw shenanigans and find their dive downs and things like that. All the quasi-duplicates. It's a good card with Drakes in play. I might build a quasi-duplicate. Ooh, hello, Devious Cover-Up. It's time to find out whether that card's good or not then, I guess. Alright, so swing with Etrata. She is just a 3-5 beater, but that is a clock that my opponent has to respect. Let's find out if he respects it. Yeah, Devious Cover-Up. Like, when we're in this situation, with an Etrata in play, and not getting shuffled in, it's actually not terrible, because it allows us to put more counterspells back into our deck. So all of these Sinister Sabotages we've been using, and these removal spells for really high-class creatures, that's going to be really powerful, putting that back into the top of our deck. Alright, so land drop and swing for 3 again. It's a weird one, because it seems to work against the deck, while also working for it. I do not care about this blink of an eye. So we basically allow them to not lose 3 life, so that we can replay our Etrata. We have the cover-up as a way of protecting it on the way back down, but I was pretty sure the fact that they have this blink of an eye, that they probably didn't have an answer for it anyway. Chemister's Insight. So, there is a really good argument for countering this right now with Devious Cover-Up, because it exiles it, which essentially means this is going to counter 2 spells. And I think I'm going to go for that. I'm going to shove all of my counter spells back in my deck. And a Vraska's Contempt. Yeah, let's just do that. So that gets exiled, so I've just exiled 2 spells there, because the Jumpstart can no longer be cast either. And there's the Sinister Sabotage we put back in our deck. That's brilliant. Beautiful. Alright, pass the turn. We are so on top of the world right now. And our opponent says bye-bye to this game. Cannot get out of it. Good riddance, Drakes. Alright, that was a really good showing for this deck. Devious Cover-Up actually did some sweet work there. Really like that little change there. Yeah, it's growing on me as this card. I don't think it's like the best counterspell in the format. I mean, Sinister Sabotage is clearly the best one, but as kind of a secondary counterspell, this is a way to get rid of Jumpstart cards, exiling both of them. My opponent clearly needed that card draw to get out of the situation they were in. So, normally what you would not do is counter card draw. You counter the thing that they follow up with. Same thing goes for like ramp and things like that. If your opponent is ramping, you do not counter the ramp most of the time. There are obviously fringe situations, but you counter the thing that they ramp into. But in the case of Devious Cover-Up, the fact that it exiled the Jumpstart card, we were actually getting 2 cards for the price of 1 there. So it was definitely worth it in that situation. Also, knowing that my opponent cared that that spell resolved was really important for us as well. So the countering on the cover-up was super important in that situation. So let's go for another game, but I think this deck is mostly where it wants to be just off that one game. But then again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't really want to value one game going really well as a sign that this deck is perfect, but we'll keep looking into it. Okay, we're in, and we've got the 3 mana. We have a dive down to protect Thiefer's Sanity, and the Thought Erasure on turn 2 to check if the coast is clear to just slap it down on turn 3. I really like this hand. It's basically 1 blue mana off of a good draw. We got an Essence Scatter. That's going to be an interesting one. So my opponent's played a Swamp, which could be either Grixis, blue-black. It's actually Golgari. It's quite a big creature-focused matchup is this one, actually. So my opponent is going to bottom that. Interesting. So they've identified that they do not need the life or the big threat here. Mostly because being black ourselves, we have a lot of answers to creatures. So I'm guessing that they realise that their life total isn't terribly important. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to pass the turn, because I know that this deck loves all of their turns 2 and 3 explore creatures. So we could actually hit a Jade Light Ranger here just by passing the turn with this Essence Scatter. Surprise, surprise, there's a Jade Light Ranger. Let's take that right out of play. There's also another situation where Devious Cover-Up is going to be really good, because the countered spell gets exiled, which is really nice for a graveyard deck. Now then, we can Thought Erasure our opponent to check if the coast is clear, or we can take a risk that our opponent does not have an answer to Thief of Sanity. So if we identify what our opponent's deck is, which is Golgari mid-range, we have to think about what kind of spells that they could have in terms of removal, which is Ravenous Chupacabras, Vraska's Contempts, on occasion Assassin's Trophy. I don't think I actually care about Assassin's Trophy though, because I think it helps us out more than it hurts us in this early stage. If I was to go for the Thought Erasure though, they get one free turn of doing whatever they want. I don't know if I want to let them have that. But if we go for the Thought Erasure plan, not only do we get to take out a removal spell that could kill Thief of Sanity, but we also get our 4th mana, which allows us to hold open this dive down to protect it once it resolves. So I think I'm going to go with the Thought Erasure. And our opponent is out of any kind of interaction. This is going to be dead, because our opponent is going to play every single card off the top from now. So I'm going to put that into the graveyard. It's very unlikely that they're going to be holding many cards in hand. Okay, so they go tap land, and it looks like they might have passed. Yeah, I think they have top-decked another land. So I'm going to go Thief of Sanity. I'm going to play on curve, which allows the dive down to protect Thief of Sanity. If I get another land, then I get to play on curve again, playing Etrata, holding up the dive down to protect Etrata, or Thief of Sanity. So my opponent getting the hits in. He knows we're not going to block. We have a Thief of Sanity being protected right now. I could shock in my Watery Grave for Etrata, which I think is worth it, because we can kill Seeker Squire on the block, and we can also attack in and exile it as well. But let's swing in first. You never want to play on your first main, if you can help it. Oh, we get a Vraska Golgari Queen. We are absolutely taking that. It's not the most impressive card to be playing on our side of the deck, you know. We haven't built around this card to make it worthwhile, but we now have an Etrata to block, and we get to swing in, protecting both of our creatures, which is a really good place to be. I don't see how we could lose this one at this stage. So my opponent probably wants to... Wow, they don't want to swing in? That's interesting. I would have offered the trade, honestly, because it's going to die anyway. We got another Thief of Sanity, so let's swing. Hit and hit, which allows us to exile Seeker Squire. That's 1 of 3 towards the Etrata win con. Thief of Sanity likely to get us there before then, though, I would imagine. I could take Wild Growth Walker, knowing that Thief of Sanity is likely to hit me more explore creatures. My life is quite low, so having some life gain might be quite nice, and I'm not really ramping into anything, so I think I'll take the Walker. And then let's just... That's a tough one. He's got one unknown card and he hasn't played it. So we could hold open Devious Cover-Up. I think I will, rather than play anything else. I'm in no real rush to play out any of my hand here. Especially if my opponent runs Ritual of Soot, then I'm committing to a board state I cannot protect, and potentially getting a blowout situation here. Opponent flooded out a little bit, but I think our hand to begin with was, yeah, it was far too good for them, so as much as they did flood out, I don't think even if they had stopped flooding out any of those lands being spells, I think we would have still won that one. Really good stuff. Alright, so we're now 2-2 with this list, and it's going really well. We have ways of protecting nice and early, which is what we want. Our win conditions are safe, as opposed to the Disperses, which were a little bit more mana intensive down here. We have the Moment of Cravings against the aggro matchups. We still haven't really come across a good Moment of Craving matchup though, so who knows, this one might not be the best. As I mentioned a few times as well, any changes that I do make are not necessarily going to be improvements at the end of the day. they are just things that personally I feel might improve the deck, and maybe in my testing they have actually ended up being the case, but maybe in further testing, or maybe when you're playing the game yourself, you might come up across different matchups where a card like this would actually be not too fantastic. So it's something to keep in mind whenever you basically build a deck that I make, or if I edit some stuff. You want to tweak this to your own personal preference, because the game's about having fun anyway. So if I take out a bad card out of your deck, if you think it's fun, put it back in. That's all I'll say. As long as you're having fun with this game, then I think you're doing whatever you're doing correctly, you know? There's only one way to play Magic, and that's to have fun, as far as I'm concerned. You can play it to win, but people who are playing it to win are playing it to have fun anyway, so you got to know what you want out of your deck, essentially, at the end of the day, so there is that. Alright guys, well I'm going to end off the episode here. I think we've run on long enough. We have done a fair bit of testing on screen. If you do want to give your suggestions as well for changes that you might make to the deck, as I mentioned, we did in my email for this list, I did get mentioned that we didn't have Helm of the Host as an option, so that's why I haven't included it in this list, because I assume that the person who sent me it still doesn't have them. And there are also other ways to build this deck as well. You can do this as Esper. I think this is the more popular way of doing it, because you have cards like Forerunner of the Legion. Forerunner of the Legion allows you to grab vampire cards, of which Etrata is a vampire, so this will allow you to pull her out of the deck. You can also put Helm of the Host, as we mentioned, in, which allows you to make copies of her to swing her in. So that makes her more of the focused win condition, whereas I think winning with Etrata and Thief of Sanity together is actually quite a nice thing. You will win with Thief of Sanity more often, I think, in this list, as maybe we've showcased that, but having that option is quite nice. Maybe this Lazav actually becomes a Helm of the Host. That's probably the card I would change. I'm surprisingly impressed with Devious Cover-Up as well. That Exile was super clutch. I really enjoyed that as well. It seems like it doesn't work with Etrata, and in many ways it doesn't, because it increases the odds that you will not find Etrata when you add in cards in, but the cards you're adding in also help you stay alive, so yeah, it's an odd one, but yeah, I think we've learnt a fair bit about today's deck. We've managed to discuss mana improvements, as it were. I actually didn't even do the suggested lands to... Oh well, it seems that it wants it wants to add in another island. Yeah, we're actually running 23, which I think this is perfectly acceptable as a 23 land deck, which is why it tried to add in another island there. But yeah, I think the mana is perfect as it is. I don't think I would change anything about it. Maybe if you come up against some Carnage Tyrants or something like that, you might want to add in Detection Tower, though I would be very hesitant to do that, mostly because you have this double blue and this blue-black. It is something that you want to be aware of. If you're putting a colourless land into your deck, you got to think which cards will it stop you from playing on curve, and in this case, if I had this in my opener, instead of a coloured land, I can't play Lazav, I can't play Thought Erasure. Potentially, you just can't play any of these, but that's something to be aware of. Other than that, I don't think there's much I would change about this list. I think it's just about where it wants to be. At the end of the day, it is a fun deck, so there is only a certain amount of improvements that you can make to the list before it is exactly where it needs to be. Possibly going down an Insight for an extra Anticipate, just to smooth the curve out a bit, because we do have a lot of 4-drops here. That might be another option as well. I do like Chemis's Insight, but I think having a nice curve is probably a little bit more important, especially since the amount of 4-drops here is quite aggressive. So yeah, I think as a final change, I actually would add in another Anticipate, just to smooth this out a little bit. We don't want as many 4-drops as maybe we do have. But yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed as well. If you do want your deck to be submitted for a deck critique like this in the future, then you can leave it down in the comments section below. I also have an email in the description where you can send your lists for me to check out, and I will do a future subscriber list on this one. Any Patrons do get a priority showcase, but I will occasionally make an exception for that if I do find a particularly interesting list like the one that you're seeing in front of you, so something to keep in mind. Other than that, guys, if you want to see more of these videos, make sure to like, subscribe as well, and if you hit that little bell icon, you get notifications when your videos go live in the future, and you never know, next subscriber list might be yours, so be sure to do that. Alright guys, thanks very much for watching, I hope you've all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.